half Viking, half god, sorta dead. You're listening to Ranking Rick Riordan, a podcast about Percy Jackson and the whole wide rest of the Riordanverse. I'm Dan.
I'm Olga.
And I'm Clara, and today we're discussing Magnus Chase and the Gods of Asgard, the Hammer of Thor.
This episode is brought to you by Utgard Lanes, the best bowling in the 9 worlds. Are you a thrill seeker? At Utgard Lanes, they play high-stakes games that will make you lose your head. Throw some axes, pin some balls, and feast on the blood of your enemies at Utgard Lanes. Now
I'd
let's
go.
get into the show.
Especially if they have candlepin,
Yeah.
flaming candlepins, I'm sure.
I like skee ball. They had that.
That's true.
Mhm. All right, so getting into some housekeeping real quick. I just wanted to say, because the way we've been recording these is very different than the way we've been releasing these. So we have like a bunch of feedback on things that like now we talked about ages ago. So I think I'm gonna aim for us to do a like feedback specific episode at some point. So if you're sending feedback, it's not going into a void, it's going into a folder.
Mhm.
I just wanted to say that. And yeah, maybe we do that like right after we finish the Magnus Chase trilogy.
Mhm.
And then I also want to say, before we get into this, because of all the Alex stuff going on in this book, we're going to do our very, very best to always use the correct pronouns. But this is particularly complicated because Alex doesn't use they, them, and we don't know when we're talking about Alex as a whole, it's kind of hard to know. I guess we say he/she,
Or we can just say Alex.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I'm going to aim to do.
Yeah.
But if we screw up, I apologize, and we're going to do our best to correct that as we go. But with that said, Clara, I have no idea what you think of this book, The Hammer of Thor. General thoughts?
Super fun.
Mhm.
I really liked it. I feel like it was fun in the same way of that the first book was, but it addressed a lot of my sort of, I don't know if I love the characters as
Mhm.
much, or I don't really feel that this has the same level of emotional depth.
Mhm.
I still don't know whether it's, up there with Tower of Nero
Yeah.
for me. And it's still really hard coming off of that
Yeah.
into the series. But that being said, I think this is up there with some of the best books, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I think it's just really fun, and I love the characters, and I love the set pieces.
Yeah, I have to agree. It's really fun while reading it, and that's one of the things that I am so happy with. Like, I don't feel like while I'm reading it that it's a slog, or that I'm like,
Something
really,
you have to do for the podcast.
or even that as I'm reading that I'm picking up on the things that I'm critiquing. Like, for me, it's very much usually like in retrospect. So that says something about how enthralling it is, how immersed I am in these characters and in, again, the set pieces and the various action scenes or emotional beats. Like,
Yep.
I'm on this journey, I'm in, and then sometimes, like, when I'm done, the days after, I'm like,
There was this. And
there
there
was,
was that.
yeah.
Yep.
And so for me, it's like, I think we talked about this coming off of Sword of Summer. It's like the best comparison I can give is versus King Chronicles, and just kind of like for myself of my enjoyment of that versus because it doesn't hit Trials of Apollo for me in terms of like quality as well.
Mhm.
But I think I like it overall.
I mean, I
so
also
far.
don't think it's aiming to do the same thing as
exactly.
Trials of Apollo.
Yeah, and that's why in terms of like fair comparison, I think it's easier for me to be like, it's a trilogy.
Yeah.
Like King Chronicles, it's a different, the Pantheon. So
Yeah. I think it's going to be very interesting when we finish these 3 books to compare it to King Chronicles as a whole,
I
because
agree.
that is the most direct comparison.
Mhm.
So I really enjoyed this book. I am liking this group of people more and more, and to the point where I think like it's getting to be one of my favorite ensembles, because I don't know that necessarily most of the individual characters aren't necessarily like my number one favorite, but the way they gel together, and there's so many of them, and how many of them that I like, I think is very impressive. In King Chronicles, I love Sadie. Walt's pretty good. Carter's pretty good. Zia's pretty good. Like, it's like I love so many more people in this than I do in King Chronicles. And I don't know that like this doesn't have the like awesome last third that Throne of Fire does for me, but I am definitely in love with this world now. And I will say my only real issue with this particular book is that I feel like the climax is not the best. I think the action is written a little messy and a little awkward, and I'll get into the specifics later, but that's my one sort of issue. I love the introduction of Alex. I love all the stuff they do with Sam's religion. Just a lot of really cool stuff. Anything anybody else wants to say coming off of that? I
think that Rick was really smart to not have a comedic relief character. I think that's why, and maybe this is just my personal preference, but everyone in this ensemble is just strong and enjoyable and a full character in their own right, even if they don't all get equal screen time. But I just that they're all people, or elves or dwarves, beings, Valkyrie, I think that was a great move, and I enjoyed it a lot.
Well, and I never would have necessarily expected Amir to be as major of a character as he was in this book,
and someone with a lot of heart too.
And it also makes me respect the first book in some ways too, as how like the fact that they set up that he was good to Magnus when Magnus was homeless just adds a lot more depth to the three of them interacting. And I just think the first book gave them a very solid foundation, and I think that Rick really hit the ground running, which is what I was expecting out of this book. Anything stick out to either of you specifically that you want to talk about in the general idea versus in the recap?
I just want to say how impressed I am with Alex, and that Rick, in my opinion, does what I found most impressive was how Rick made very clear that people have been gender fluid throughout history. This is not new. Because I think there's this awful reactionary crap of like, kids these days and their gender identities, which is
weird ideas.
Ridiculous. And to take such a strong stance from the first moment, while not making everyone like great, thinking of Half-born, but to say like, people have been gender fluid all throughout history, and that's sure. No one in this book is like, what's that? That's not possible. And so he's able to do that thing that I know fantasy writers. There's sometimes this thing of like, but if or historical fiction, if I do this, then I have to make it so that they're like persecuted or whatever. And Alex has a past that's very hard and difficult, but we don't have to see that right now constantly.
I think that I totally agree that having that historical perspective was awesome and really interesting and not necessarily something I would have expected. And I think that he really found the right balance of having Magnus not know everything, but know enough. And so like he still has room to learn with the reader if the reader needs to learn, but not like I hate it when there's like, everyone in this world is perfect and knows everything and does like let our people be wrong a little bit and then learn. And I think I think that is the best way to go.
That's something that I wanted to say of like there are ignorant like Half-born. He comes at it from a place of ignorance, but Half-born isn't like a bully character, and isn't like, I refuse to expand my point of view on this thing because I'm from several hundred years ago. But it doesn't matter. Half-born is willing to like learn and try with Alex, and Alex understands that, and they have that relationship of like, you're not perfect. You need to be better, but like we're still friends, and I think you can do that, and you respect me, and I respect you. And Magnus comes at it from a different perspective of like, I'm confused, and I don't want to step on your toes. I'm going to respect your boundaries, and when you're ready to like tell me more or share your experiences, I'll be here for you. And that's like a very human thing because no one's perfect. Everyone has to learn something sometime. And it's this thing of like, Rick isn't punishing ignorance, but kind of hoping that his readers step up and come like, I'll explain some things, but like, I'm leaving enough room for you to like learn about people on your own and see the human. Like this is the thing with Rick's representation. It's about humanizing people and perspectives. But it's not supposed to be a one-stop shop for learning everything about identity and
And Alex says that, right? Yes. Alex says, like, don't make me your representation of everyone who's gender fluid. And I think the conversation that Alex and Magnus have about pronouns is so good and cool, where Alex is taking some time to educate Magnus once they've established a friendship. And that Alex also sets a boundary of like, don't ask like why I might use one set of pronouns on one day and not the other. And Magnus accepts that boundary, no questions asked. So there's a real like, you know, both Alex wanting to educate, but also Alex not feeling like I need to share everything with you. You're entitled to that.
Yeah. And I think you kind of hit on there too, that I think the way that Magnus is handled within this is really good too. That even just the way, I mean, this is maybe slightly adjacent to the gender fluid stuff, but specifically that Magnus is like, I'm going to make friends with this person, even though they don't necessarily want, like, I'm going to reach out to them right from the get-go because that's who I am. And that was a good moment of him showing why he's different than other characters. Like he is, I don't know that Percy would have done that is kind of what I was thinking. And that he really is the like wanting to reach, you know, hand across and help somebody else. And I think that him and Alex have really good chemistry. And I think that Rick overcame a lot of easy pitfalls that he could have fallen into with all this.
Yes.
I think it would have been really easy to make Alex completely about that and nothing else. I think it would have been easy to make her/him, overly perfect. I think, you know, a lot of times people are like, you know, they have to be for everyone, so they have to be perfect. I think that Alex is just really good as a character, period. So that I think is really great.
There's no like model. Again, as you said, like, don't look at me to be the model for everyone. And it's the same thing of like, Alex has character flaws and has baggage like anyone. And it's just, Yeah. And at the same time of not being like the model stand-in representation, Alex is a role model, I think, in many ways that these heroes should be. These are heroes and they have heroic qualities. And I just really feel like Alex models very well good communication and boundary setting, which is awesome that is taken as a like, this is a thing that is good instead of like, and that's why Magnus tried to break down those boundaries because he needed to know the real Alex. Like, no, Alex gets to have things for Alex, not for Magnus.
Yeah, and the thing is, I understand Tower of Nero specifically is like pretty like intense and philosophical and stuff. But I mean, the more we talk about this Alex stuff, the more I do think that there is a lot of intelligent, real lessons and things in this book compared to, you know, even if you talk about like Dark Prophecy or something like that, which I like that book a lot, but it's not necessarily as thoughtful as this is.
Can I say a thing that is also inclusive of Alex, but goes beyond? There's so many abusive dad characters in Rick's books. And it's just kind of fascinating to me that this is like, I don't want to say a trope, but like a well that Rick keeps coming back to.
Archetype.
Yeah, or an archetype that's like, the mom is perfect and beautiful and can do no wrong unless she's distant like the goddesses. But we have Alderman in this book, Alex's dad. In Apollo, we have Zeus. We have Nero as Meg's adoptive father, even though Meg's biological dad was like, fine. We have
so
Raina's.
He had to die.
Yeah, of course. We have Raina's dad. And it's just someone, Gabe, yes. Yeah. Like, and then Paul comes in and he's great. Yeah. So it's not like a universal thing. I just feel like aside from the maternal goddesses who are very removed from their children, we don't see that many like bad moms. But
we've had some stepmothers.
Most of them are dead. Most of the moms are dead.
You know, a lot of parents are dead in this universe.
It definitely is something that he gravitates to. And I do think it's one of the few things in this book that gives me the same sort of reaction I had to the first book, which is, oh, this feels a little samey. Because I didn't feel that sameness in this book as much, but it did feel like a little bit like, oh, we're going to Mr. Alderman and it's an abusive dad again, and we just did Trials of Apollo, and you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Next book, Evil Mother, Loki. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, that is true. But Loki's also an evil father.
Oh, Loki.
Loki does it all.
All right, so shall we get into the recap?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so we start with Magnus and Sam meeting up to gain info about Thor's missing hammer. But Sam has to leave for a Valkyrie emergency before Otis, their informant, arrives. Otis tells Magnus to go to a White Sparrow in Provincetown, but their conversation is cut short when he takes an axe to the heart. Otis, of course, being a goat, for those who do not remember that. So Magnus chases down a mysterious assassin, and they fight. He warns Magnus not to listen to Otis and ultimately escapes.
All right, so let's talk about this. First of all, I think it's a fun opening little segment. We still don't really know why Otis gave incorrect information.
I'm assuming Otis was deceived.
Yeah, I mean, my assumption was that Loki whispered in his ear or something, but they never actually explain that.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about it. See, this is one of those things where it's like I finished the book and you point something out. I'm like, oh yeah, that didn't seem like a problem when I was reading it.
I mean, it's not like a big deal to me because I feel like you can answer it away, but it is just interesting that part of me is like, was that actually Otis? Was it Loki disguised? Like, I don't know. Was it an illusion?
I hadn't considered that. Yeah. Did you guys have like theories of who this assassin was going to be at this point, or?
I did, and I was bummed that I was wrong.
Oh,
who did you think it was?
I wanted it to be the uncle. What's his name?
Oh, that would have been so cool.
Randolph. Yeah.
I thought it was a guard Loki.
Yeah, I got to that point, not in this scene, but I think maybe like the second time he showed up or something. You know what it was? As soon as we actually saw the uncle doing other stuff, like when Loki was still torturing him and stuff, I was like, okay, it's not this guy.
Yeah. Yeah, he does not have enough independence to
be a ninja.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess I wanted him to be cool. But I mean, he's cool
just
in other
sad.
ways. But,
no, he's just sad. Yeah, that's exactly it. Randolph is here to be sad.
Yeah.
Bum us out. Yeah. I had no theories except I was like, well, I went into this book knowing Utgard Loki was going to be in it. So I wasn't surprised. It was just one of those things where I was like, I thought this was going to be the introduction of a new character. So I kind of wish that we did get another like bad guy character and then still had the Utgard Lanes thing.
Yeah.
But like, it's fine. Like, I like Utgard Loki, so
instead we got some awesome giants. Who doesn't love giants?
We got so many giants. We got giants for days.
So Magnus meets back up with Sam, and they decide that they need to retrieve Thor's hammer as soon as possible in order to prevent a horde of Jotun from invading Midgard. Sam says they will need Blitzen and Hearth's help to successfully enter the White's tomb. She reveals that they've been hiding in one of Mimir's safe houses, but does not tell Magnus why.
You want to talk about this?
Yeah. So I'm not a big fan of like arbitrarily hiding information from people that like, I should say the trope or like the story mechanic of I'll tell you X, Y, or Z later.
Yeah.
Or
like,
you get cut off in the middle of saying something.
Yeah,
I hate that.
Yeah.
It was happening so much. And at first I was like, so it happens with like, I mean, obviously it happens with Otis because he gets killed. And that's different. That's different because like that's brings on an action thing.
Yeah.
But like, oh, I have to go do a Valkyrie thing. So I'm not going to tell Sam saying like, I have to do a Valkyrie thing. So let me tell you this later. Oh, why they're at Mimir's, I'll tell you later. The fact that Hearth and Blitz disappear without telling Magnus that where they're going themselves. Not a big fan of that. I don't really buy that.
Well, they also didn't even need to say specifically why. They could just say, "Hey, we have to go do something for Mimir for a few." Like, if they were worried about like they didn't want to tell him about the prophecy yet, sure. But it is
just
kind
to disappear without a word to him personally. Not a fan.
Yeah.
Once Alex gets introduced, or like the idea of Alex, the term Arger being like, oh. Alex is an Arger. Yeah. There's an Arger here. And then repeatedly being cut off of the definition of that as a way of like teasing the reveal that Alex is like gender fluid is like very weird to me.
You hear the term at least 3 times before you actually get a definition to the term, which just doesn't seem necessary.
So that to me was like the most blatant example of that. But the problem was where I had was with this buildup and this intro part is that this kept happening and it just was this additive effect.
I did have several. I also do not like the trope of like, we're going to do this. Why? There's no time. It's like, no, you're walking, so you could.
And this was happening a lot in Percy too. Like Chiron and people be like, Percy doesn't know what a Greek thing is. Whatever. We won't tell you now. I'm like, why
I had
not?
to keep this secret from you. Blah, blah, blah. I honestly, here's the thing. I understand why it bothers you here because it is a lot of them. I personally think it's better than a lot of the Percy and Heroes of Olympus stuff because a lot of them get answered relatively quickly. Like by the time that the dinner ends and Sam talks to Magnus, he's caught up on everything. So like to me, or at least everything that everyone around him knows. So like no one's still holding information back, and that helped quite a bit. And then like I understood the Valkyrie thing. She actually did have to leave, and the fact that she like he's like, why do you have like a punch in your face or
a
black
bruise
eye?
Around your eye?
And she's like, I will specifically tell you after dinner. Is like giving a time frame that helps a lot too to me.
It's like when it's occasional, I'm like, all right, I can usually ignore it. But when it's just a lot in a row or the same thing, as if it's building to a big reveal when it's really not that, it shouldn't be a big reveal. Sometimes it's like a little frustrating to read. I also reread this part is the thing. So reading this twice and not knowing what the reveals are was very annoying.
Yeah, I believe that.
All right, so Magnus arrives back at Valhalla and meets his new hallmate, Alex Fiero, a transgender and gender-fluid shape-shifting child of Loki. Do we want to talk about, like...
the specifics?
The specific idea of, like, the shape-shifting? I guess I'll say this. Alex is chaotic and pissed at first because he, presently, thought he'd be stuck as one gender after dying. He calms down and helps them fight some lindworms, like, in the battle once he kind of has an idea of what the setting is. He learns the rules. Yeah.
So I thought that was I thought that the idea that he was freaked out about not being able to change anymore was really smart and a good way to sort of tie back to what they set up in the previous book of Magnus feeling sort of violated too.
Yeah.
We're supposed to read this as his body physically changes not under his control. Yes.
That's how I understood it.
I was unclear
the way
on it.
that in which Alex is gender fluid and trans is that that's where like Loki's like shape-shifting ability also kind of plays a factor in Alex's identity. That's how I thought it. But Alex can't control what like can't decide.
Because Magnus specifically asked something about like, why do you choose this and that? And Alex says, I don't. It just happens. And given that Alex is worried about being frozen at Valhalla, that does imply to me that Alex's body is changing. But on the flip side, by the end of the book, it really is just like Magnus is like just able to tell the gender by looking at
and
them.
Alex is surprised by it.
Yeah.
So I read all of this lack of clarity as a decision on Rick's part to basically answer the sort of like, I think people get really focused on like, well, what's in your pants, right?
Yeah.
And so Rick is basically saying like, nope, don't ask it. And he basically has Alex say that to Magnus. So I think we're supposed to both maybe be a little bit like, I wonder what's going on. Like, is Alex's body changing, but also just be totally satisfied with, you know what, we don't have an answer.
Yeah.
We really don't need an answer at all. It doesn't matter at all. We know Alex is a boy some days and a girl other days, and that's all we need to know.
Yeah.
And I think that's cool that Rick does that.
I want to be clear, in no way of any of the stuff I've said a critique. It's more of like I completely agree with you. We don't need the answers to this. As just sort of trying to explain my reading of it.
Totally.
But,
and I think there like he leaves it up in the air.
There doesn't need to be a definitive answer. Transness doesn't look any one way. And again, like it whatever primary and secondary sex characteristics someone has is not going to determine pronoun usage or gender identity. Or,
it's just, I mean, all of this gets complicated because if Alex is physically changing, then it's not just about gender, it's also about sex, which does add a layer to the conversation, sort of. But I don't know. It just is complicated. It's interesting. I'll say on a personal level, like I'm gender something. I'm gender complicated. And I'm very much like struggling to figure that stuff out. And so like part of me wants to know the answer because like the idea of being able to physically change to fit what your mind is feeling at the time is definitely something that is like appealing. And then I get into the question of is that appealing, and is that a good thing as a writer to let them be able to do that when other people wish they could and can't as easily? And I don't have answers to any of these things. But this book made me think a lot, and I think that's awesome.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
And I consistently appreciate Magnus also sort of immediately being attracted to Alex and not necessarily questioning that so much as just having a crush.
Yeah.
And so Magnus is also he's not immediately defining his sexuality and saying like, now I'm attracted to Alex, now I'm not attracted to Alex. Like, what, like, who am I? Like, but just being like, wow, I'm really like, I'm crushing.
What is it that like makes people want people that aren't the person want the person to have a label? I want to know, should I be reading Magnus as queer, or is it just because it's specifically Alex, or like, but there's no reason. I don't need to know that answer. Like, but something about makes me want to know the answer.
Yeah, I think it's just a way that we like to organize the world. I think that humanity likes organization, and it's easy to put things in boxes and categorize things, because then a lot of the way that we can understand things is by labeling them.
Yeah.
So anything that doesn't fit into an easy label, it can cause like internal chaos, I guess.
Yeah. And I think there's something also about relating to a character to be able to say like, oh, that's how I identify too. And so we have something in common, and here's how you're dealing with what's going on in your life, which means maybe I can too.
Yeah.
And without labels, I think that is harder.
Yeah.
But in this particular book, I really appreciate when Rick does use labels and when Rick doesn't.
Yeah.
And I think that's, and when he gives explicit information and when he leaves it up to just like, here I am existing in the world. I just think this is very mature for Rick.
Yeah.
And I'm fascinated to see people send feedback specifically about Alex, because I definitely would like to hear other people's opinions and stuff.
Well, this is interesting. Like, just to say, when Percy kind of feels himself getting a crush on Annabeth or any of our other like, straight couples that develop like feelings, they don't go, oh my God, I'm straight. I'm a straight person. And there's no line about that of like, wow, I have heterosexual attraction. So like, we don't need Magnus to have that like conversation with himself necessarily, just because there's like something about Alex that like sets his heart a pitter patter, Well,
I will say though, on the flip side of what you're saying, it did seem, and I wasn't positive about that, I'd have to go back and look very specifically. It did seem that most of the times lines were written that were clearly crush lines were when Alex was a girl. So that's part of what
I was paying attention to that too.
Yeah. And so I wasn't sure if that would like become a problem in future books or not. That that's the one thing.
Yeah. So I'm interested to see the third book, and I'm interested to see, more of Magnus's headspace. I just think this is a great relationship. Yeah. I really like it.
Yeah, actually, so I think I mentioned to you when I started reading this book.
And Dan is pointing to me for the record.
Olga.
Yes.
That I spoiled myself because I couldn't help myself on something. And that was I was only like a chapter or two into Alex. And I was like, I need to know whether Sam and Magnus is a thing or whether Alex and Magnus is a thing. So I don't know where they end up or any of that. Right. But I was like, okay, good. He likes Alex.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I definitely ended the first book very unsure about where they were going with Sam. And this is way more interesting.
Yeah. I just like, again, I'm also always just a fan of like strong male female friendships. So the fact that like from the get-go for me personally, and at least from the get-go of this book, like, that is Magnus and Sam's like deal, that there's no love triangle going on in this book, like very much is a reassuring and frankly like a departure from some of Rick's other series. So yeah,
definitely cool.
Okay, so we were fighting Lindworms. It's the battle.
Yep.
As they fight,
I want to say I really like Alex's weapon too. On top of everything else,
the Garrett, Garrot.
And the fact that there's so many levels to it because it's like just cool for action sequences.
Yeah.
B, makes Alex unique, but on top of that there's actually like a backstory that's like impactful around it, and that it like has a character arc of its own within this book. It's all friggin' awesome. Yeah.
I really knew nothing about pottery until I started watching an HBO series called The Great Pottery Throwdown. Highly recommend British Bake Off vibes if you're into it, but without food, if that's not your bag. And I had no idea that clay cutters were garrots. So when I saw these people using them, I was like, that's a weapon. So like without that knowledge, I think I would have read this very differently of like, what does this have to do with pottery?
Yeah.
All right, so as they fight, Magnus experiences a searing pain on his face. Loki talks to Magnus through Randolph and invites him to the wedding of Sam and Thrym. Thrym is the earth giant who stole Thor's hammer. Magnus is tasked with acquiring the bride price. Loki claims that he will return Mjolnir in exchange. Back on the battlefield, Magnus's body begins to overheat from Loki magic, so Alex decapitates him.
As all great love stories begin.
That's so good. This is like Rick, of course, loves these relationships that are like lots of banter,
of course,
whatever. But this one, I think, takes the cake.
Yeah, I think so too.
Pure violence.
Just such a good start.
While dead.
Well, I also just want to say, I also just like the Loki talking through Randolph. I
feel so bad for Randolph, but I'm also like, you brought this on yourself. And then it's like, that's the purpose of this man throughout this entire book. And and I know that, and even Magnus feels that way. But like, we'll see what happens with book 3. But Randolph is a very fascinating tertiary, secondary character.
I mean, again, with no specifics. So I've read like the first third of the third book.
Of course,
I know. Yeah,
you couldn't give us the last. It's the last book.
I know. But I'll just say that I if I hadn't done that, I probably would have ranted a little bit about Randolph in this podcast.
And we're now deprived of a rant.
And now,
Randolph.
But I'm glad because it would have been premature. Like, I think that the story is not over, I guess is what I'm saying. Like, and so, yeah, because I felt like just in this book, I felt like it was a little too the same note the entire time. And yeah, I guess.
But we're allowed to criticize this book for that, even if we know.
But even before I read the third book, I had originally written down a rant, but before I even read it, I went and thought, well, this is completely a cliffhanger, like literally. I'm like, this isn't the end. Like even before I read the third, I was like, clearly more is going to happen here, and so it's been one note, but it's not the final note. Like, I never thought this was like the final thing we'd ever hear.
A long, sustained note of sadness and pain.
Yeah, truly going out with a whimper. So, and that's not Rick's style.
Do you ever think, like, what if we saw Trials of Apollo, but like they were tertiary side characters? We're just like, they're just sad.
Oh, man.
We were Lavinia's perspective the entire time. It's like, wow, this guy's just so sad all the time.
Help him out, man.
I mean, we'll get to that later, but I feel the same way with like Sigyn, Loki's wife, of like, something's gonna probably happen with this. Like,
I was left being like, that felt odd.
Weird.
Like, I expected that to pay off in the same scene, and the fact that it didn't, I was like, well, okay.
Yeah, I know. I was like, oh, Rick. Oh,
yeah. I just think like it's a similar thing. How to a lesser degree of like in book 1, we know that Utgard Loki is going to come back.
Yeah.
So like, Magnus has to get him a golden apple is like, not the most interesting quest, but it just leaves the room for Utgard Loki to come back, and he comes back with a bang in this book.
To me, this was more
worse.
with Sigrid or whatever her name is, Sigyn. With Sigyn, I was half like, okay, I'll try to reserve judgment, and half frustrated by holding that off, because the fact that Magnus straight up hands over his like climactic thing is he hands over the sword because she gives him a look.
Nod,
and so I'm like, I want to know what that like, because I don't know, it didn't feel like I can't wait to find out. It was more like, well, that was a really bad decision that only happened because of her look, and now I don't know why she had that look.
I'm intrigued.
This is tied together for me with Randolph, because Randolph just hits the same note of like the tortured victim of Loki. Every time. So it's very tied together, and we'll get to that action scene in part 2, but even so, it's just one of those things that already I was like, man, Randolph is being tortured here, and he just keeps on being tortured.
All
right. So while dead, Magnus dreams about Randolph's family dying in a deadly storm. Case in point. At dinner, we see Alex's heroic death and learn more about Sam's marriage predicament.
Yeah, let's keep going.
Okay. I liked not Sam's death. I liked Alex's death. Is a weird thing to say, but
I like the inclusion of Alex saving another demigod.
That's one of the reasons it was so interesting, and also like projecting the whole like, oh, this person was dishonorable, and then they had a chance, and it's like, I don't agree with that as a interpretation, but this is like the culture of the like Norsemen and all of this as well, and it's just kind of like, you're not on their side, but you're on Alex's side of trying to do something good.
Well, and I also, something we haven't really mentioned is I'm glad that Rick didn't ignore the stuff with trans people and being homeless. And that was, if he hadn't mentioned that, given Magnus's backstory, that would have been a glaring omission. And I think that was really good.
Also, and the Thanes being sort of like, we're so accepting of you for all these different reasons, and for Magnus to be like, bleh, was also really great.
It's self-congratulatory and frankly, this is the problem with like, I'll just say like Boston, but generally like Massachusetts, like liberalism is like the self-aggrandizement of like, I'm not ignorant while being while professing a ton of microaggressions. Like, it's just this thing of like, so many people here are like, I'm so well educated, I'm so smart, I accept everyone. And it's
I tolerate the world.
And it's but when you go around Boston, there is not just a homelessness problem, but there is an LGBTQ specific homelessness problem as well that we do not have a handle on. So
we'll talk about this more in a bit, I'm sure, but I read this book as just such a scathing critique of the Boston area liberal
elite.
Wealthy elite. It from this scene to the elves, like it is really taking a jab at that, and I think it's awesome that he does.
Rick moves here because one of his sons got into college here, and he figured out this place real fast.
And he clearly loves some things about it that I think are a lot of the same things we love about it, and can look at other parts of it and really rightfully criticize it, and it's awesome to read as a Bostonian.
It's not just flattery of our tourist attractions. All right, Sam's marriage, do we want to discuss this now, or
I was definitely trepidatious at the beginning of this book about the storyline being Sam has to marry a giant. I liked where it all went and stuff, but that wasn't necessarily a premise that I was excited about.
It's just like, as a way of demonstrating that she was not for, like, as much as I like her and Amir's relationship, like I like Amir, I love that they're in love, like they're very cute together, right? But it's almost like as a way of demonstrating that this is Sam's choice to marry Amir and be betrothed to him as a teenager and do this fairly traditional thing. that not everyone who's Muslim does. She now doesn't get a choice with a giant in a way, and it's like trying to do in a way like a parallel.
She affirms her choice in this,
and that's what I'm saying. Like she has to affirm her choice by rejecting something that is forced onto her.
Yeah.
And that's kind of weird to me, but I like what's happening in the book. It just gives me a little bit of a kind of feeling.
Yeah. I totally agree. It feels like a sort of, okay, I see what you're doing, and I don't know that what you're doing is anything but good in a way, but also there's something about this that gives me pause. My favorite part of this entire plot is when I think it's Sif is like, well, like we couldn't just put a goat in a wedding dress. Ha ha ha. And I was like, oh, Grover. I had a good laugh. It felt like a little inside joke for me.
That's good. I like that.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Great callback.
Yeah.
Good job, Rick.
Yeah, yes. I know. Because that was the first thing I thought. I was like, we're doing a weird wedding thing again with a giant.
Not so easy this time.
No, but I really like a lot of the stuff with Sam. And that being said, I'd also like to hear other people's opinions.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
But I keep going.
Yeah. In terms of just like cultural critiques, I feel like that's something I might want to circle back to on a feedback episode or on our like overall ranking episode, because I don't want to spoil myself at all with the third book. Yeah. And like even though this is the book where I'm having like questions about it.
Well, I mean, we had it last time.
Well, we did, but I mean, even more so in this one that I'm just like, I don't want to know yet. So I want to critique this as a whole.
Yeah, that was the funny thing in the previous podcast. Remember, you guys started talking about it, and I was like, well, it's not going to stop being an issue.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So the next day, Sam and Magnus fly to Cape Cod to meet Blitz and Hearth. They've been in hiding ever since Hearth uncovered a prophecy predicting Blitz's death. No.
Okay, can I just say, I know I'm all like, oh, don't put labels on it. But I need to know about Blitz and Hearth.
I completely agree.
If by the end of the next book I don't know, I will feel, I was going to say betrayed. That's really strong. I'll feel sad.
Yeah.
I think it's straight up odd. Again, you don't have to say what they eat. Like maybe one of them's bisexual or they're both bisexual or whatever. Yeah. But like, just show them kiss.
Yeah.
Right.
Because they should.
Right. But maybe that'll be like a really good, I'm holding out for a moment of really great payoff where they sort of like all of a sudden like turn to each other and they're like, they kiss and they're like, oh, like that's what that's fingers crossed.
I've loved you all along.
Yeah.
Because the thing is like, I understand, I'm sure there's some people who are like, why can't they just be really good friends? And like, sure. But like
they're really good friends with Magnus.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's not like we don't have male friendships in this.
And there are moments in here that are just like so good. Like Hearth is in it's Utgard Loki's like holding him up or whatever, right? And it's the line is like Blitz's eyes were just like focused on Hearth, like watching everything, and like, come on.
Stop
teasing us with this, Richard.
Will they? Won't they? Yeah, Richard, you're in trouble, Richard.
Well, and then I got very worried when they introduced that cow lady.
Oh my gosh, yeah, but then, but then
Hearth is oblivious.
Totally, or just completely disinterested.
Yeah, very interesting.
Good one. Okay, so they find the white sparrow and open a coffin, causing the white inside to spring to life. The white Gelir doesn't have the hammer, but rather a sword called Skofnung.
You have some really fun words to say.
So fun. I totally know how to say.
They say Skofnung in the audiobook.
Skofnung. I have the pronunciation thing.
You got the guide.
I have the guide. I totally didn't spend 6 months in Copenhagen and didn't learn a lick of Danish because everyone speaks better English than we do here. I hate this thing. And it's not in the pronunciation guide.
Oh
what is wrong with this thing?
It's only like one of the most important items in the book.
It's alphabetical. No, it's not here. Okay. So I'll say it however.
Skofnung.
However I want to say it. Yes. So Gelir says that he needs to kill the group for him and his men to break free of the tomb, but they need to hold a meeting first. I like this part. It was very funny, but they're still threatening.
Yeah, I forget which one of you mentioned that this book has like amazing set pieces, and this is definitely one of them.
So good.
Yeah.
Eventually, our group defeats the undead, but Randolph and Loki appear. And then awfulness happens.
Yep.
Loki causes Sam to stop breathing and orders Randolph to stab Blitz with the Skofnung sword. He reveals that the only way to save Blitz is to use the Skofnung stone. To save Blitz from bleeding out, Magnus collapses the barrow and turns him to stone, with the light petrifying dwarfs. They go to the
Pause there.
Yeah, right.
I mean, one of the best scenes in the book for sure.
I appreciate the fact that we got the prophecy that Blitz is going to die, and then immediately it pays. Like, there's no waiting for the whole book to maybe have him die at the end. I mean, maybe that would have been better for that that scene, but like the fact of there's immediate consequences was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different things to like here. There is the comedy at the beginning. Mm-hmm. I like how creepy the sword seems to be and all the different rules around it. Loki being able to just make Sam stop breathing. Yeah, freaking terrifying. Yeah. It's scary. The fact that Magnus cuts his uncle's fingers off.
Yeah.
There's and then he can't heal the wound, and then they're smart and they make him go to stone, and Hearth and Sam are mad at each other, and it's just all great.
It's so good.
Earlier we talked about Clara, you mentioned how there's not much comedy, there's no comedic relief character, but Jack kind of.
Yeah.
You're right, and I adore Jack because he can be an animated. He's Clippy.
Yeah.
And I love him.
Less annoying.
I love Jack. He's one of my favorite characters in this book.
Yep.
And you're right. He is comedic relief, but I just love him because he's a sword, so he's fine. He can be funny. He's not a... Yeah.
So I just think this was kind of the right amount of funny too, to break it up, because he's Lady Skofnung, I love you. Let me see some of that unsheath metal.
Good. I love Jack.
Yeah. Really so I just think that was just the right amount of annoying Magnus while really dark, terrible, scary stuff is happening over there.
Yeah.
So they go to Provincetown Airport, where Sam's instructor Barry lets them borrow his plane to fly to Alfheim. Amir shows up at the airport and joins them on the flight. Sam has opened up to him about her second life, and Amir is struggling to understand. Barry is possessed by the goat killer, who tells them to seek out Heimdall to find him in the Jotunheim and to bring Alex along.
In Jotunheim,
yes.
Yes. I just really enjoy all the stuff with Sam, Amir, and Magnus, and him sort of playing referee, and when Sam can hear and he doesn't think she can, and all that stuff.
Yeah. I also like the rules of how much people understand versus forget. It's a different way of understanding the mist too. So just Sam's grandparents learning something and forgetting, and Barry completely forgetting that the people were ever there, but Amir having this trying to understand, It's really good. Just nice world building. Yeah.
Well, and it also I feel like it fits in nicely with Piper's dad, as far as what we hear here about how his brain, if it wasn't for Magnus, his brain sort of would have melted down. And they do kind of the same thing for Piper's dad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And with that, I think here is actually a pretty good point to stop part 1. And we will be back with part 2 next week, where we will finish the recap and do some ranking. Please send us your thoughts and your feelings on this book and the previous ones. You can do so at ourpodcastfeedback@gmail.com. You can leave a message under the YouTube version of this podcast. You can tweet at us at Ranking Riordan, and send us reviews and stuff. That'd be great too. And thank you to everybody who left all the great Spotify reviews. We have ratings. We have over 50 ratings on Spotify already, and it's only been a month. So that's awesome. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And may the gods be ever in your favor.
Bye-bye.